Thank you, Senator Reid. I want to thank both of our witnesses for appearing. I want to make an observation up front. When we talk about civilian control of the military and the implications for this waiver, I don't think anyone believes that civilian control of the military is seriously at risk from Lloyd Austin's nomination. We all have immense respect for Lloyd Austin and his service in uniform. We have immense respect for General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the other senior leaders of our armed forces and our combatant commands. So the question we're really facing here is whether the experiences and the skills and the relationships that career military officers bring to the job after being recently retired is right for that job. So I want to speak first to our witnesses about some perceptions. Ms. Cohn, you write the idea that we're going to confirm recently retired flag officers to be Secretary of Defense 2 administrations in a row could help create the perception that the terminal point in one's military career is not being a four-star officer, but rather being Secretary of Defense. Is there any way that we can avoid that perception, given the fact that actions speak louder than words, if we move forward with this waiver?
Thank you, Senator. As I said, I do think that granting 2 waivers in a row will seriously weaken the norm of this being an exception rather than the rule. I do think that it will seriously implicate, this problem that exactly the way you describe it, that the culmination of an officer's career is not 4-star, but Secretary of Defense. Can that be mitigated? That will be difficult. I think the only way that this chamber can mitigate that is to be very, very clear in the specific reasons that they think Mr. Austin is the right person for this job at this time, and especially to maintain the statute as it stands, not to simply think that, well, we've granted 2 exceptions in a row and therefore the statute is dead and doesn't really count as law anymore, but to emphasize that this chamber really believes in the principle and is making an exception to what they think is an important rule. Thank you.
And also, you point out a couple other perceptions I won't dwell on, is that you say the perception of expertise residing in military officers only, and you distinguish, I think, capably between military expertise on the one hand and security or foreign policy expertise on the other hand. And then, of course, the perception of possible favoritism or chauvinism for one service or one regional combatant command. I want to move on next to the political nature of this job. Not the partisan nature, but the inherently political nature. When a Secretary of Defense has to engage in sometimes heated political disputes with inside the Department of Defense, between services and between combatant commands and agencies, with senior staff at the White House, within the cabinet over budgetary priorities, with Congress over similar priorities. He has to engage with the media as well. I'd point out that in my lifetime, I think 4 of the most consequential and successful Secretaries of Defense all had significant political experience. 3 of them had partisan experience either. Cap Weinberger, Dick Cheney, Leon Panetta, and then Bob Gates. He had partisan experience, but I think he writes in his memoirs he had a lot of political experience from his career as a civilian official at the CIA, and then a lot of political experience being a university president at Texas A&M as well. Ms. Cohn, does the skills and experiences that you gain in the military, which is inherently apolitical and designed to be so in our republic, prepare you for all of those political disputes that you might have as Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I think the short answer to that is no. I think obviously the experience you gain as a 4-star military officer is immense. It's important. It's helpful to understanding all of the things that need to be done to understanding many of the things that need to be done in the Department of Defense. But as you point out, many of our most successful Secretaries of Defense have not only extensive interagency experience, but sometimes also legislative experience. And it is simply not the case that a military officer who has spent his or her entire career, again, 4-star officers, the higher you get in the military hierarchy, the more alike those officers are. And many of them come from combat arms backgrounds, like yourself. And that is a certain type of experience that is important and helpful, but I do not think comprehensive in the way that you would want a Secretary of Defense to have experience. Thank you.
All right, thank you. One final question. On page 10 of your testimony, you assessed the tenures of Secretary Marshall and Secretary Mattis. I commend everyone to read those brief histories. Were those tenures, after they had received these waivers, successes to be repeated or cautionary tales about the wisdom of this 7-year cooling off period?
Senator, I think as Dr. McInnes has really ably demonstrated, the job of Secretary of Defense is incredibly difficult and almost no one is ever really prepared for it. However, I think that both the tenures of Secretary Marshall and Secretary Mattis basically reinforced the concerns of the members of Congress who made that initial statute. They relied very heavily on their military networks. They seemed to be uncomfortable dealing with political issues and, in Marshall's case, with protecting the president from an overambitious regional operational commander. So I do not think that these were shining examples of the best that we can do with Secretaries of Defense.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.